Welcome to the John Henry Weston Show. I'm your host, John Henry Weston, and we are here today to discuss something truly revolutionary, a kind of self-help program that has helped Catholics all over the place, and specifically Catholic men, to make them stronger men. And it has helped some 20,000 men to become stronger and better Catholics. Stay tuned. We're going to begin, as we always do, with the sign of the cross. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. I am very pleased to introduce you all to someone by the name of James Baxter. James Baxter probably is unknown to most of you, but you might have heard of his program called Exodus 90. And we're going to discuss that on today's show, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Welcome, James, to the program.
John Henry, thank you so much for your time. It's a blessing.
So you are a former seminarian and then have since decided that's not your calling, started into family life, and now you're doing this program, which you sort of brought from seminary out to the secular world, and it's exploded. So tell us a little bit about yourself, first of all, your background, and how this got to be.
Yeah, fantastic. So James Baxter, I am from Indiana, Central Indiana in particular, went to the public schools K through 12 there, but was introduced to a high school boys fraternity that really galvanized my faith and introduced me, fortunately, to the contemplative life early on. So that fraternity really revolved around the service at the altar, shaped me, kind of shaped my commitment to living constantly in fraternity and a life of prayer. So kind of from there, went to college seminary up in Minnesota. Spent a little bit of time in a Benedictine monastery after that, discerned out into marriage and family life from there. So so Exodus, maybe to clarify one thing, started as a seminary formation program from a mentor of mine out at Mount St. Mary's in Emmitsburg, Maryland, the theological seminary there. So I wasn't in that seminary, but what had gone on, this experiment that he had started called Exodus, I had heard about for years, and he simply shared with me the testimonies of these men and kind of how they were calling it really the most critical factor in their formation for the priesthood. So I was going to go on my way, probably go to business school, when he kind of asked a simple question, which was this: if these seminarians are suffering from all these forms of idolatry, what about laymen everywhere who don't have a formation house? And so my task kind of became, how do we kind of take the notes that were shared and structure them in a way that could be shared, and how could we share that with as many men as we could? So that's what I've been doing for the last 5 years.
Excellent. Okay, so take us a little bit through the program. What is this? It's one of those, for a lot of people, when they saw it, they kind of look at the requirements and go, oh my gosh, can I really do that? It seems pretty hardcore. Take us through it, if you will.
Yeah, so first, it's, why are we doing this at all? It's all about freedom for us. Obviously, when we look even at our sacramental rites, the church, at her best, places a heavy burden upon freedom, for validity of sacraments in many cases. So really what this is about is growing in our freedom so that we can love. Kind of our fundamental belief, and not everyone will grant this, and this gets us into trouble with certain folks, probably not your audience, is this: that most men are enslaved to different things, and even good men, good Catholic men are enslaved to different things that take away from their true vocations, to marriage or to priesthood. So Exodus is a 90-day spiritual exercise for men, to grow in freedom. So anyone, when you look at it, it's like, well, there's really nothing new here. And that's the point. This is about prayer. This is about kind of reclaiming and representing the church's, strong tradition of asceticism with a fraternal, a communal component that's essential for this to work. So you commit to a daily holy hour. We kind of make that kind of burden, and we place that on everyone. We don't make exceptions to that. You need to pray an hour a day, and you need to spend time in mental prayer every day. And so that's what you commit to.
And just for clarification, that holy hour is like an hour of, is it totally sustained 1 hour, or is it throughout the day 1 hour, or is it even before the Blessed Sacrament 1 hour? What are you talking about?
So we recommend an hour before the Blessed Sacrament. Where that's not possible, we say, you've got to get an hour prayer a day. If that's at one time, ideal, great. If not, that's fine. But you've got to spend 20 minutes in mental prayer. When we're not having that intimate conversation with the Lord, when he's not influencing our faculties, well, we just drift, as we all know so well. So we place that as a heavy burden upon the men. And, kind of from there, with prayer as the foundation, we bring an element of asceticism into this. So the list can seem kind of burdensome at first. Cold showers are what everybody talks about. Up in Canada, they're quite a bit worse than in Southern California or Florida, or whatever have you. But yeah, we take cold showers. We exercise regularly. We encourage our men to get a full night's sleep. Now, when you have young kids, that might not be possible. But the point is that I just actually had my first child a few weeks ago. So I newly aware of that dynamic in reality. But the point is, really by removing our distractions, you should have more time for sleep. We don't drink alcohol. We don't do desserts or sweets. We don't eat between meals. We fast every Wednesday and Friday. So just as the church asks us to fast on Ash Wednesday and Good Friday during the 90-day journey, you do that every Wednesday and Friday. You really bracket your use of technology. So you kind of return it to its place as a tool for your work or for your school. So any form of, quote, leisure on technology, we remove. So no social media, video games, sports, movies, etc. We non-essential material purchases, we ask the men to avoid. So the whole kind of go to Amazon to medicate your problems, we ask that to be removed as well. We then listen only to music that lifts the soul to God. And that's pretty much rounds it out. So that seems like a lot, and it is kind of a lot. It takes a little bit to get used to when you get into it. Some guys say, like, man, I don't have time for all this or whatever. But when you kind of submit to the regimen, you realize, like, you are overwhelmed with time. You have so much time on your hands, and you kind of see where your heart is. Is your heart really with the Lord? Is your heart really with your spouse and your children? You see when you remove your distractions, and a lot of times that can be a little bit startling. And lastly, you commit to a fraternity meeting. So this isn't a self-help program as such. This is done with a small band of brothers. We encourage 5 to 7, and ideally there's a priest there to be the director. That's not always possible, but that fraternal component kind of rounds it out. So again, the fundamental belief for us is that men are enslaved, and men are, I think, the greatest untapped resource in the church. And it's only by committing to a regimen of prayer, asceticism, and fraternity that we're going to be returned into a place of freedom to then respond to our vocations to love.
Beautiful. Well, great program. I'm going to get into the nitty gritty because there's a lot of questions there. So let's start with cold showers. Everybody's talking about cold showers. I have the privilege of going to visit in-laws in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina once a year, and we live in very cold Canada. The cold shower difference is, well over 15 degrees, because here, when you turn on the cold water tap, it's nearly freezing. It's just, we don't quite get icicles through the water, but it's pretty much like that. You go to, when I'm in Myrtle Beach and I have a cold shower, it's like, oh yeah, this isn't really cold. There's a big difference there. What do you answer to those people who say, hey, we're from Canada, what's your problem?
Yeah, so I was visiting recently northern Minnesota, and I was lamenting. Those guys were lamenting similarly. So, the point here is just like when you wake up in the morning, start the day with a sacrifice. Mm-hmm. Say no to what you want. Say no to comfort. Pope Benedict said that so beautifully, and that quote resounds everywhere. Fortunately, that we're not made for comfort; we're made for greatness, right? So. Mm-hmm. The point of the shower, is simply, you're not going to die, and so, why not start your day in sacrifice and allow that then to be the foundation for the rest of your day. So our point is this, it's simply an offering. So As to what degree it is, we kind of leave that on the men to decide what they can tolerate. But that's really what we're trying to provoke in the guys, so that later on in the day, when they just want to sit down, have a beer, watch sports, and zone out from life, they're like, no, like I'm committing to saying no to myself dozens of times so that, I can say yes, to higher, more important things.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is really to fight all of these slaveries. I guess selfishness is a huge one. Obviously, pornography, not only pornography as a triple X or whatever, but all the pornographies that are out there, which includes the so-called clean, even movies that have all sorts of innuendo and nonsense in them. But then there's also slavery to video gaming and all sorts of distractions with the internet anyway. These are the things you're trying to root out.
Yeah, precisely. So, Exodus is not a pornography program as such. For guys that are in the throes of an addiction, they need something else. But at the same time, therapists love Exodus because many times it's the most effective supplement to their clinical therapy work, because it's really bringing order to their clients' lives, which they haven't had the smack of in forever, maybe. Yeah. And what was interesting, so Exodus really started growing very organically. The whole story, behind it is pretty marvelous. But the bottom line is it's on this massive multiplication effect, because men experience a freedom, and when you do, you can't help but share that with others. And so early on, a generous foundation locally, our Sunday Visitor, I went to them asking them for support, to accomplish a big goal we had. And they said, before we want to do this, we actually want to fund an independent research study so we understand what exactly is going on here. Why is this growing so much? And one of the things we asked is, why are you coming to Exodus? And what's the benefit to you years afterwards? And what was so interesting was, regardless of the dependency, from anger to drinking to pornography to masturbation, those dependencies were halved. And this study was done a year after the initial 90-day experience. So, that's why we say, and we don't mean this in a vague sense. We just mean it, whatever your idol, when you submit to the competencies of the church, prayer, asceticism, fraternity, you're going to find yourself in a better place.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's get into more of those very controversial suggestions. One of the objections that I heard was around no media, no movies. What do you do with, especially you're a married man. What about if your wife says to you, "Hey, dear, let's watch a movie"? What do you respond? How do you deal with that?
I'm not a great example of this because my wife and I don't actually have a television.
Aha.
We have a lot of silence in our house, which is great. Fosters a lot of conversation and time together. I understand that that's not the rhythm for a lot of people, and especially that can kind of be, in a way, the routine. Like, you come home, you sit down, you watch the news or the show or whatever. What we say in that case is simply this: like, this is your Exodus and it's not your spouse's. And so it does affect the marriage. But we really encourage men to, operate with this sort of kind of prudence. It's just like, are you just forcing this on your spouse? And if this is that frustrating, you need to go about that in a different way. So we actually have a whole kind of onboarding experience for married men. We're like, hey, this is what this entails. It's a lot, and it could be reorienting your life at home. And we only want you to continue with the blessing of your spouse, because it can cause an agitation when that blessing isn't there. Right. But even when spouses are a little bit hesitant by it, so many more by the end are like, wow, I so much prefer the man you've become. This is the man I thought I was marrying, however many years ago. Because at the end of the day, these men are just more focused on their spouses again. And I'm not saying that, obviously there are, some women who maybe don't want that, who are distracted and addicted to their own kinds of vices. But for most women in touch with their femininity, that's not the case. That's precisely what they want.
Beautiful. Beautiful. You have, you mentioned meetings. So this is also a challenge for people, perhaps people in remote communities like we are, or people where, they don't have a supportive priest. And you mentioned 7 to 10 guys or whatever you said. How do you get around that when you really don't have a community, or if you do, there's not many people interested in it, or what do you do? Like, do you have virtual possibilities or what?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Virtual fraternities are not ideal. We've just we learned early on the success rates on those weren't nearly as good as when you're meeting in person in the flesh.
Yeah.
And but what we do say is, if you've got pre-existing bonds with these guys, say it's a brother, say it's a coworker, whoever, a friend from the distant past,
Mhm.
those relationships could carry you forward in a remote fashion. We really present this as an evangelical opportunity.
Mhm.
Men like concrete things. There's something about this as a 90-day process that, men like that. The meeting is very structured. It's not just sit around and share your feelings. It's very liturgical, and it's very structured, and men like that. And so we just encourage guys to, one, pray over if this is for them, and two, pray over who they should invite into this. And oftentimes the Lord has just put people on their hearts, and then they, kind of have an opportunity that's not just vaguely, meet with me every week for the rest of forever, but hey, do this 90-day thing with me. And
Mhm.
the response to that can be surprising. So it can be a challenge. It can be a challenge to get out there and ask someone to do something like this, especially when there's a lot of vulnerability at stake. But our experience, and from the resounding feedback we get, is that most men are very isolated, very alone in the experience of the church today. You show up to mass, maybe you're greeted or whatever, but you're so rarely known, even
Mhm.
if you're volunteering or whatever. Um, and that's not to say I'm asking for a liturgical experience that's, all about sharing your feelings or anything, but where that accountability, it doesn't exist, or fraternity doesn't exist. In most people's experience of the contemporary church, Exodus offers a solution and a way out. So we just encourage men to kind of get outside themselves, pray over it first, but then get outside themselves and make a concrete invitation.
Okay. And you guys are starting up soon for a kind of end with Lent into Easter. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So 80% of the men that come through Exodus every year come 90 days to Easter Sunday.
Okay.
So it kind of, that start date fluctuates, obviously, with Easter.
What are
It's
we at this year?
January 13th. That's Monday,
Okay.
January 13th is the big start. And
Okay.
obviously it kind of, couples, especially here in the States, the desires for New Year's resolutions with Lent, but most profoundly experiencing the newness of the resurrection,
Yeah.
hopefully as a new man. So that's the big time, and that's what's coming up.
Beautiful. Well, that's great. There's a bunch more questions that I guess people would have. Where can they learn more about this?
Yeah, exodus90.com. So
Okay.
our site is there. It's built to just kind of explain what this is. You'll see a lot of testimonials there, from kind of influential folks in the church today to just normal guys who picked this up and found it. What's been amazing to me is how orders, ecclesial movements, normal parishes, seminaries are taking this up. And what we say is, Exodus is a spiritual exercise, and I had the privilege of doing a 30-day silent retreat a few years ago, and it had its movements to it. It had its times in it. And as we've observed this now in thousands of cases, Exodus has its sort of spiritual movements to it that are pretty profound, at times very challenging, especially as you remove your medications or your distractions. But what that does, it places you in greater vulnerability and intimacy with Christ, you kind of create the space for him to move you and call you again. And so I'd encourage you to check out the site, Exodus. We're on a mobile application, so you can look at it there and download it there if you're ready to get started, simply.
Hmm. And what do you guys charge for this kind of thing?
Yes, so Exodus, free to start. First week is free, and then it's $10 a month for 3 months. We are a charity, so there is a giving program at the end of it, but that's what it costs, so $30.
Great. And it's like an app that you can use, and what's the user experience like with the app?
Yeah, so user experience. So every day during Exodus, you receive a scripture passage and then a reflection that we've written with weekly action items to accomplish as well that kind of help orient your fraternity meeting every week. So content that is there, and then it's kind of what we learned early on was your correspondence with your fraternity is should be pretty honest, pretty authentic. And guys were like, yeah, I don't like losing those messages within all of my threads. So we built kind of a communication portal, simple text message threads as well into the application. But it's pretty simple. It's not meant to add to the distraction. If you find yourself distracted on our application, you're a pretty bored person. It's very simple, very straightforward, very clean to kind of facilitate the experience.
Beautiful. I love the fact that you guys are, this really does attack something that I think is so core and in everyone's life, really, and that is selfishness. It's probably the root of so many of our temptations to sin, and it's something that's so not recognized. And speak a little bit, if you can, to that, to what you've read from the testimonies you've received about the issue of selfishness.
Yeah, the thing we hear over and over again is I had no idea how much, and then fill in the blank. And in all of those cases, there's something of pride, some place where, kind of the ego, you've placed yourself on a pedestal. But Exodus humbles you. I mean, when you submit yourself to the Lord daily and you remove your comforts and you're accountable to others, I mean, you are humbled, and it can be really challenging. But the truth is it's humility that places us back in touch with reality, that orients, God to being God, you and your place in his creation, and in the community as well. So it can be really challenging, but most men come to Exodus with a hunch for why they want to, but typically why they stay and where they're at the end is for a completely different reason. And that's typically God's purpose for them, obviously, for doing this. Yeah.
Now, I love too that you said this is like an evangelical tool. You can use it as such. So you're talking about finding men in your community who are perhaps not all the way there with the faith, or would you suggest finding more like-minded people per se?
That's a great question. So I'll just give you a story for me personally. Last year, I was newly up to this community. It was in a weird situation I was in where I had to move, to get the support of a bishop to get this off the ground. So I did. Obviously, I know you guys go through a lot, and we went through a little bit early on. And so I was in this weird situation where I was talking about all these values I am today, but I was in a new place and had nobody. And so it was kind of the time for Exodus to kind of, be what it is for me in a way that was really kind of profound. And so I was just asking around, and it ended up forming a core group of very practicing good Catholic men, but I really felt like in my prayer, I had been introduced to this Lutheran pastor in town. And I was like, man, I don't know if I want to invite him into this. Kept praying over it, and it's like, no. Long story short, because his experience of the seminary was primarily and only intellectual and not a holistic seminary experience, which is pretty typical of non-Catholic environments. It was really his first experience of formation, and by the end he realized in good conscience he had to resign from his church because of how drawn he was to Catholicism, resigns, and was received by our bishop this summer and is now teaching Catholic theology, which is pretty amazing in our community, and wow. So I say all of that because, this is by Catholics, it is Catholic, and it's predominantly for Catholics, but Catholicism's a beauty and it attracts. And, in that case, someone that wasn't even a Catholic, found so much fruit from this exercise.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So just age-wise, a lot of people are, especially our audience, they're all over the map. So we've got young people, older people, middle-aged people. Should you shoot for some kind of homogeneity within your age group, or is it all anybody and everybody?
Yeah, so we encourage groups to be about the same age. Not that there hasn't been benefit to kind of experiencing generational kind of distinctions, if you will. But that's what we encourage. Exodus, I will say this, is really an anomaly in men's ministry. Most men's ministries, especially in the States, attract older guys who are retired looking for things to do. Over 50% of our men are under the age of 34, and that's something we're very proud of. There's something, I mean, we see this in the orders that really kind of lay down the full claims of the gospel, and we see this here too. I mean, it just draws young people. You know, we just don't make dispensations, and the young love that. And it attracts them, it draws them, so the only thing, the other thing I'd say about that is, if there's a spirituality at the heart of this, it's the Desert Fathers of the 3rd and 4th centuries, who's we use their work frequently throughout our meditations, our reflections, daily. And young men, they're so rarely exposed to that time in the church, mostly because that's so rarely preached. And so that really draws younger folks. Generally, that's been our experience in our first few years.
Okay, so I'm real interested now, and I'm scared to do it because it's just scary. But doing it with some people would actually force me to do it, which is good. How do you most entice people to do this? How do you encourage them to do it? What's your best method of finding a group to do this with, getting people out there with you?
I encourage you to just make a concrete invitation and say things like, why do you want to do this is the first thing worth asking. Is there something in your way? Is there something at work? Is there a struggle, a sin? And when you're just able to state that to others, they're like, wow. And then they don't judge you. They think, wow, I've got that and worse, or other things that I'm working through, but have no place of moving forward concretely. So that's what I say, is just like make concrete invitations. Don't just send a text message. Don't call somebody up. Say, hey, Fred, I'm working too much. I'm working till 9 every night. I'm not present. And it's becoming an idol. And it's in my way. And that puts the other in a place of really kind of making a discernment of like, yeah, what's in my way. So that's what we say.
Great. And it's I would think an awesome Lent where you're completely focused. It's a little bit more like the traditional Lent, which was a little bit longer on the front end as well. So it sounds like great prep. We've just come through Christmas, and so everybody should be feeling ready to engage in some kind of self-denial now anyway. So I think that'll be great. Any closing words for our audience, James?
It's just that for freedom, Christ set us free. St. Paul writes that. And, when we're not free, we can't love. And when we look at the church today, the reason why Exodus has blown up is so many people have been agitated by recent events in the church and without. And but they want a way to channel some of that agitation to something spiritually beneficial. And we find the rigor and challenge of Exodus has been a great outlet for that. Not to say we shouldn't just tell the truth, and you do a lot of that, through your platforms, John Henry. But there's more that we can do than just be upset. And there's positive things that we can do to unite ourselves more fully to Christ's sacrifice and to offer that for the church so desperately in need of renewal today. So again, Exodus is not only about your personal gains, but really bigger spiritual realities at stake today in the church. And your sacrifices can be instrumental, not just visibly, but invisibly, more importantly. So, yeah.
Absolutely. You guys are building soldiers for Christ in an amazing way, kind of like the training, the Marines, if you will, the boot camp for that. Give us a closing word on Our Lady's influence with regard to this, because I know this is a men's movement and we're focused on the cross and following Jesus in the cross. How does Our Lady play into Exodus 90?
Absolutely. So Mary's sway over this, you'll see within the reflections early on, and we'll introduce the rosary at points. And I would just say this, I read a book by Emile Noubert, and I'm mispronouncing his name because I'm not so French, but called The Life of Union with Mary. And he talks about sort of the Marianization of the soul, and how when we live with Mary, we really encounter reality in a completely different sort of frame. So that work itself has been massively influential upon how I look at my own faith. and certainly has all kinds of influence over our work here. So we offer everything, as it relates to our work. We certainly have goals we set every year. We certainly have numbers we try to reach. By the way, on the topic of numbers, I saw you guys eclipsed 100 million page views.
That's right. Just recently.
Pretty insane. But on our side, rather than stress about numbers, we just commend those to the Blessed Virgin, and she takes care of the fruit. And that's why, we've already reached 20,000 men in just a few years, working completely independently and having not just no support at the beginning, but definite criticism at the start. And that's very much Mary's kind of carrying us along and interceding for us before the throne.
Beautiful. James Baxter from Exodus 90, thank you for being with us on the John Henry Weston Show. May God bless you.
John Henry,
And
God bless you.
to everyone out there, give this thing a shot. It will increase your faith life and make you men, that soldier for Christ you need to be in your own heart, in your families, and for the church. God bless you all, and we'll see you next time.